Hello. Good morning. Is this on? Yes. Good morning, everybody. Hello. Hello.
People to sign in on the
Make a
iPad.
clap.
Well, and I don't know if it's always out on the weekend. That's the problem. Okay, but someone will.
I gotta tell ya, first graders only need to do that one time. Come on, everybody. Okay. Good morning. I want us to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover this morning. Bob's one work, 1 hour definitely takes the full hour, so we want to give him the time he needs. Just some quick announcements from me and Carol. I just want to say we have two openings for tours tomorrow. Of the Bishop Watterson tour, I think at 10, and then a senior tour. Where's Jackie? Yeah, what time is that tour, Jackie? At 10 also. I did. So we have two openings for tomorrow. So if you're free tomorrow, we're in a pickle. We need two people. I'm just going to turn this over to Carol Collier, and then we're going to keep going.
Good morning. I just want to point out today that this really is a gala day. This is an all Columbus day. We have Bob talking about Ferdinand Howald. We've got Carol Genschaft talking about Amina Robinson. And not only that, in addition to more Columbus support, we have two opportunities for travel within the city. The first one Carol's going to tell you about, and I will send out an invitation later today, but you should have all the information you need to know. And the second one is that Gisela has opened her home, and the invitation will come out. This is going to be a celebration of Gisela's friendship with Amina. So we have two in-town tours to look forward to during the month of November. So Carol, would you like to talk to us about what you have in mind? I think this needs to be here.
I feel like crooning. So glad to see all of you. I feel like a sheltered doggy that's just been adopted into a wonderful family. So good to be back. Well, I found out that Megan and I have a passion for the Day of the Dead. And so we have decided that it would be a lot of fun, serious fun we're calling it, to go and visit Ferdinand Howell at his gravesite at Green Lawn Cemetery on the 2nd of November, which is part of that greater holiday. On that day, the 1st of November, 2nd November, the dead get to visit with the living. So he'll be out there waiting for us, all right? So I've got a sign-up sheet back there with some Day of the Dead art to catch your eye. So if you would please sign up, we will, on the 2nd of November, we will leave at 1 o'clock from here on a bus, and then we'll come back after that, and Megan and I are going to, we're just into this, we're going to do some refreshments for you. So it will cost $7 to do this, to pay for the bus, basically. So if you will sign up back there, email me so that I know how many we have. And you can, as your reservation is that you've signed up and said you're coming, I'll collect the checks and the money on that day so we don't have to, the turnaround thing with our treasurer and everything. Is everybody good with this? Understand? Okay, boo.
Okay. Yeah, I like the darker lighting. That was better. All right, I think I'm mic'd up, but I don't think I really need the mic. But they're recording, so they're having me wear it. All right. I did this Thursday night, and I didn't get as far. Thank you, but I didn't get to the end. All right. So, quite frankly, I think you are probably more interested in Ferdinand Howald the collector than maybe some of the early stuff. So I'm going to kind of breeze through the early stuff and try to get to the collecting part fairly quickly. So one of the few pictures of Ferdinand actually taken at the museum while his collection was on the walls, so somewhere after 1931. He died in 34, so, I don't need the, no spotlight, please, thanks, unless you need it for recording. So anyways, very few pictures of Ferdinand. And of course, we have to start somewhere, so we start from the beginning. This is where he was born, although he only lived here for probably about 4 years. And on der Aar, I've seen it as am Aar, I've seen it different ways, but it's Wangen on the Aar River. You can see those are contemporary pictures of Wangen, Switzerland. All right. So 1856, he's born there. He comes to the United States with his family. 1860, 1861, settles outside Columbus, and then ends up moving into Columbus. His dad was a blacksmith, and he got a job at the Hertenstein Stove Company in Columbus. So they come to Columbus. There's the family tree that Anastasia provided me. His parents, Elizabeth and John, and he had 5 brothers and sisters, 2 of whom married. Arnold and Frederick actually owned a successful furniture store in Columbus for many years. And I wondered whether the Hertenstein Caroline that married Arnold was from the Hertenstein Stove Company, but I don't really know. It's interesting to note that Ferdinand was the 5th of the 6 children, and he outlived them all. Just not by a lot, but by a little bit. So anyways, like I said, I'm going to breeze through some of the early stuff. Everyone, I think, has seen this photograph. It was in the Picasso exhibit. This is his graduating class in 1878. Ferdinand's on the lower left. He actually sticks around at Ohio State and gets a 2nd degree. He got a Bachelor of Science degree in 78. In 1880, he got an Engineer of Mines degree. Okay? So for the next 20 years, from 1880 basically till 1906, he works in the coal mining industry in West Virginia, particularly in the New River District at the Rush Run Mine. And these are some Wikipedia photographs of the area. He ended up eventually being the owner-operator of at least 9 mines in West Virginia. And he also was pretty successful in speculating in stock. He sold or bought low and sold high on a lot of things, and in 26 years made enough money to retire. And he's basically either 49 or 50 years old at that point when he retires. One of the suppositions is the precipitating event for his retirement was an explosion in one of the mines in 1905 in March, where 13 miners were killed in the explosion, and the next day 11 more rescuers of the miners were killed in a second explosion at the mines. So 24 people died during this explosion. Whether that was enough for him and to say, I'm done, I'm getting out of the business, but he sold his stake in 1906, and he moves to New York City. But the family's still in Columbus. I think they're living on East Rich Street at that point. He had a residence on Bryden Road, but in 1910, he builds a house. That's an old photograph of the house at 78 Park Drive. That's one I took earlier this year. Oh, is it for sale? Well, it's interesting. The family that's lived here has lived here for since the 70s. And after Ferdinand, one of his nieces, Flora Schwann, I never know if it's Schwann or Schwann, anyways, was the deeded owner for a while after his death. It cost $75,000 in 1910, and I read an article where they talked about that there's this new fashionable area to live, and one of the grandest and nicest houses was Ferdinand Howald's. It overlooks what's now Wolf Park, but back then was Franklin Park. It's a beautiful house, as you can see. It's 10,000 square feet. It's big, and of course, the whole family, for the most part, was living there at one point. Okay, so it needed to be pretty good sized. All right, so just a couple images of some indelible things from the collection, and also words that I read that were used to describe Mr. Howald. And I think all of them are pretty apropos of his character. Okay, so he's going to start collecting. The first thing that we know that he bought, 1894, he's in Chicago, and he buys 3 etchings by Anders Zorn. Anders Zorn had been a kind of a sensation at the Chicago World's Fair. He'd come over to run the Swedish exhibition at the fair and ended up staying for a year. And he stayed around and lived off and on in America for years afterwards, and he was very well known as a presidential portrait maker. He did Grover Cleveland, and he also did this portrait of William Howard Taft. But for whatever reason, in 1894, Howald's buying 3 etchings from him. I don't know why, I don't know anything about the etchings, but that's kind of the collecting that we're aware of while he's still working, not retired. In early 1913, like January, he goes to an art auction in New York and he buys old master works. Now, did he buy these 2? No, I don't know. Okay, I don't know what he bought. All right, these are 2 Howald old master works that are in the collection. And it's interesting because he continued to buy old master works throughout his life. Not in great quantity, but he liked them. Whether they were works that appealed to him, obviously they're Christ images in this case, whether he used them to decorate the New York apartment, I don't know. All right, so that's January of 1913. What happens in February and March of 1913? Anybody? The Armory Show. There it is, which is the formal name, International Exhibition of Modern Art. But it was held at the 69th Regiment National Guard Armory, and so it's now forever been known as the Armory Show. I got a lot of my information about the show from this book, The Modern Art Invasion, a very interesting book about the Armory Show and how it came about. The pine tree, a colonial symbol for rebellion. It was used as in a lot of the literature, and you can see they even use garlands of evergreens and stuff to decorate the hall. There aren't that many pictures from the Armory Show, and I'm going to try to breeze through this pretty good. I think you know quite a bit about the Armory Show. It was huge. 1,200 to 1,300 works, almost 300 artists. 2/3 of the works were American, because that was the intent behind the show, was to really give American artists a chance to exhibit their work free of the National Academy restrictions and requirements. And they really did try to make it a survey of modern art. And you can see they started as early as Delacroix and went all the way up to the present day with Duchamp and Picasso. And like I said, they highlighted Cubism quite a bit. And it was 25 cents to get in, but $1 on weekday mornings. Any idea why they might have made it $1 on weekday mornings? They wanted the collectors to come and not be hassled by the huge crowds. Because this really was about selling the art. They tirelessly promoted the art to try to sell it, particularly for the American works. Right? So if it's a little less crowded, believe me, they had huge crowds. The last day of the exhibition, they had over 10,000 people just on the last day. So, like I said, the group at the top, the Association of American Painters and Sculptors, formed the end of 1911, December of 1911, for the express purpose of being able to provide opportunities for American artists to exhibit their works free, like I said, of the Academy's restrictions. All the artists that were involved, there were only 13 or so that started it in the beginning, were all people that had trouble getting their works out and getting seen. Primarily, that was Walt Kuhn. He was really the motivating force behind this. Okay? The first president was a man by the name of J. Alden Weir. He was a pretty well-known artist at the time. They wanted somebody well-known to head it. But as soon as he found out what their true agenda was, which was to buck the Academy, he said, no, thanks. A month later, I'm done. Okay? So the next president was Arthur B. Davies, who was one of the 8. He was a Henry, follower, and part of that crowd that had exhibited at the Macbeth Gallery in 1908. Henry really was the one initially leading the charge against the Academy and creating opportunities for artists to exhibit their work. But Arthur B. Davies, they thought he was going to be a safe choice. He was kind of not a publicity hound. He was kind of a low-key person, kept to himself. But they found out later that he really was quite the workaholic and could be really forceful when he wanted to be. But he had a really good reason for why he was kind of on the quiet side, and that's because he was a bigamist. He had two families. He had married into one family, and they lived in the suburbs, and he had children, and he would see them on the weekends. But he had a second family in the city that people didn't know he was an artist. Everything was kept quiet. His poor wife couldn't go out in public together and be seen. It was really unfortunate for her, but he kept up this two families for quite a long time. But anyway, so I'll get to how things came about, but of course what they hoped was that this would really generate interest in American works and American artists, given obviously the bulk of the space to American artists. But what ended up happening, of course, was, I guess we'll do this. This is Arthur B. Davies. This is a work from the Howald Collection, okay, and it's up right now. And you can see how different his style was from the other Ashcan school painters, the other painters in the eight. He was still painting unicorns and mythological things at this time. Walt Kuhn, like I said, was the other real driving force behind both the organization and the show. And that's a work of Walt Kuhn's. Okay? And I'm going to introduce a third person you may not be that familiar with. I certainly wasn't. Walter, and I'm going to say Pak, but I don't know if it's Pak or Pack. Walter Pak. Walter Pak was a student of Henry's, but he'd moved and was living in Paris, and had lived in Paris for quite a while, spoke fluent French, knew all the Parisian artists, all the French artists, was friends with both halves of the Stein family, with Michael and his wife, and with Leo and Gertrude. So he had access to everybody, he knew everybody, and when he found out that this exhibition was going to happen, he pretty much volunteered his services to help out on the European side. So when Kuhn and eventually Davies go over to Europe to scout works for the show, he's their guide in Paris. Okay, he's their in, all right? And this is one of his paintings. This is not in the Howald Collection. I don't think there is one in the Howald Collection, but I wanted you to see one of his works. But he was, like I said, a big part of the show. When they were in Paris, this either was at Picasso's studio or at the Stein's apartment, I'm not sure, but Picasso wrote out a list of the artists that he thought they should include in the show. And it's interesting, not only did he include his friends like Juan Gris, but he included Marcel Duchamp and Robert Delaunay, who were kind of in the rival Cubist group. Okay, there were the Salon Cubists and the Gallery Cubists. And Duchamp and his brothers were kind of the head of that other faction, but it didn't stop Picasso from recognizing that they were legitimate and needed to be part of the show. And interestingly, Walt Kuhn penciled in the name Braque at the bottom, okay, to include Braque. But all these artists, I think, ended up being part of the Armory show and are part of our collection as well. But these were the stars of the show, okay, the European artists. Matisse, people were seeing Matisse very much. A lot of the artists were seeing Matisse for the very first time. And also Constantine Brancusi. But it's interesting, in the book, the author says the pronunciation of Brancusi is Brancusi. I don't know if that's right, but I'm used to Brancusi. But Pack and Davies and Kuhn went to Brancusi's studio and were really entranced by him, because he tended to wear like Romanian dress, and he had a big beard, and he was if you put an artist in the dictionary, you put his picture, he looked like an artist. Davies actually bought a Brancusi work when he was there at the studio. Davies was quite the collector as well. So I think at least 4 Brancusi sculptures ended up in the show, And of course, it was derided, because of it's just like a block of stone, it's not really a sculpture. But the undisputed star of the Armory show was this painting. Marcel Duchamp went from being somebody that people had mostly never heard of to being probably the most well-known European artist in America after this show. This was mocked and ridiculed and talked about for the whole time of the show, and even after it traveled to Chicago as well. There were even like contests, find the nude, And what was interesting is that everybody kind of assumed it was like a female nude, but apparently, and I don't speak French, but that translation is more the masculine translation of nude versus the feminine, so it may have been a male nude. But anyways, it was the sensation. And Cubism itself kind of came to represent everything that was kind of modern, and if it was just Cubist. So there were Cubist parties, and there was Cubist fashion, and there was Cubist food. I mean, like I said, this was a huge thing in New York the month that it was there. This sold out of the show for $324 to a San Francisco gallery owner, is my understanding. All right, I put this in here because I actually had this, and I kind of had forgotten I had it. It's a set of stamps that came out in 2013, kind of the 100th anniversary of the show and modern art, and you can notice a lot of the names from the Howald Collection included there, including our John Marin up there from the Howald Collection. But I just thought this was kind of cool to see. And then, of course, they had to put Marcel Duchamp in there. All right, so why is the Armory show important for us? Well, Ferdinand Howald went to it. He was there. I don't know if he went more than once, or he may have. I mean, they had lots of repeat visitors. Did he buy anything out of the show? Not that I'm aware of, okay? But he definitely went, all right? And so did this man, okay? And this man ended up playing a pivotal role in the creation of the Howald Collection. Charles Daniel, born in 1878, died in 71. He was 92 years old when he died. He was the son of a German immigrant from the Essen area, the coal mining area. Whether that had created some affinity with Howald, I don't know, but he was a first-generation immigrant, just as Ferdinand was, and he was kind of the middle child of 9 kids, and his family ran a German restaurant in New York City. And later, in 1906, with his brother George, he opened a kind of cafe saloon in New York City, and a lot of artists would end up coming there to eat. And he became friends with several artists. I know you won't be able to see this, but this booklet about the Charles Daniel collection, there's a picture of Glenn Coleman, painting by Glenn Coleman. Glenn Coleman was one of the artists that befriended Howald there at the saloon. In 1908, he bought an Ernest Lawson painting for $22. And in 1910, he bought 2 John Marin watercolors when he went to the Stieglitz Gallery, Gallery 291, for the very first time. And it prompted Stieglitz to say, well, if saloon keepers are going into art, America is certainly waking up. So that triggered his interest, and he really wanted to open a studio, and he rented some space above a stable in 1912, and he called it the Daniel Studio. And by December of 13, after the Armory show, he sells his interest in the cafe saloon that he had with his brother, and he opens up the Daniel Gallery at 2 West 47th Street. Rockwell Kent created the logo for the gallery, and Man Ray, for many years, designed the catalogs and hand-wrote some of them. His first exhibition in 1913, he set out the intent of the gallery. He said, it is dedicated to the young painters of individuality and to the older that have kept alive an ideal through many years of work and endeavor. The aim of this gallery is to encourage individuality and promote a more general appreciation of the finer things in art. So, that's 1913, late 1913. At some point in 1914, Howald comes into the gallery. Find my notes here. According to Charles Daniel, he always came in by himself, always alone. But he came in this one time and he saw a work, Procession by Manigault, okay? He didn't buy it right off. He inquired about the price. He didn't buy it. But about a month later, he wrote to Daniel and said, asking if this work was still available. And it was. So this was actually the first purchase from the Daniel Gallery by Mr. Howald. And like I said, sometime in 1914. By 1916, he bought 43 paintings from the Daniel Gallery, the most he ever bought in 1 year, and the next year bought 25, ultimately buying more than 300 works from the Daniel Gallery over his lifetime. He liked to check out new artists' work. He would buy one or two things and take them home and live with them, and then if he really liked them, he would buy more. He was very loyal to the people that he collected. I don't know if this sounds a little like somebody we know, but it sounds a lot like the Siracs, okay, and what they would do. So, anyways, let's see what I have next. Oh. Yeah, or either in Columbus or in New York. I assume probably New York to start. But he had quite a collection in his house here in Columbus as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about how the collection ended up here. But Anastasia sent me this page from his purchase journal. We all saw the page that was in the Picasso exhibit that had the one, but this is one from a different time. You can see it's numbers 118 to 140, okay? But look, every one, John Marin, and I'm sorry, I have to remember the artist. Oh, Kelly, but Daniel Gallery, December 2nd, 1918. Daniel. Every one, Man Ray, Preston Dickinson, John Marin, Charles Sheeler, Charles Demuth, Marsden Hartley, all these in that relatively short time. And you can see, not paying huge sums for them at that point, okay? And so he's buying a lot, but a lot of the same artists in a relatively short time. So, as we know, John Marin was a particular favorite. 28 John Marins in the collection, including that work, like I said, the Maine Coast one that we saw on the stamp. Charles Demuth, 28 Charles Demuth. And I say Demuth, I've heard it Demuth, I don't know the correct one, I just say Demuth. A dozen Marsden Hartleys and a dozen Preston Dickinsons. This work's up right now, I believe, upstairs. And the same 12 William Glackens and 12 Maurice Prendergast. Once again, interesting note, Glackens was actually in charge of the domestic works at the Armory Show. And obviously was friends with Henry and all the other artists. Interesting thing about that show as well, the whole idea behind it was they were just going to pretty much, if you sent them works, they were going to put them up, okay? They wanted people to have the opportunity to sell their work. They got so many submissions, so many works, they ended up having to have a jury, which is what they were trying to avoid in the process, because that's what they didn't like a lot about the Academy and the way it selected works. And there were a lot of artists who were upset when some of the works that they submitted weren't hung. Okay? But as we know, they still hung up like 1,200, 1,300 works. Edward Hopper made his first sale out of the Armory Show for $250. And let me tell you, that was a lot of money in 1913, and it really kind of kick-started him and kept him going. Right? No, it was a picture of a sailboat. It was a kind of a trend-setting one, like a landscape with a sailboat, is my understanding. Okay. So all during the teens, Daniel's collecting American works, okay, for the most part. There are not that many collectors that were doing that because, like I said, after the Armory show, everybody wanted to have the European works, all right? So Howald was pretty much, he wasn't the only one, but he was one of the few that was focusing on American works at this time. And let me tell you, he kept the Daniel Gallery going through the First World War because of all his purchases during that time. He kept buying during that time. Now, we know he went to Europe in 1914. We read the account of how he got stuck over there when the war got declared. I don't think he made another trip until after the war. I wanted to show you a couple more things of the works that he would have collected from Daniel. This one's up right now. This is one of my favorites by Ernest Lawson. Yeah, I know. Actually, I have to thank Sarah Isaacs, the Megan's intern, for sprucing up my images that I collected. And then Kuniyoshi, another Daniel artist. Okay. Now, in 1917, when Gallery 291 closed, many of the artists from that gallery went with Daniel. Okay. John Marin was one of them. There were several. I love this picture of Kuniyoshi. Okay. And I'll kind of harken back to him a little bit later. Charles Sheeler, Stanton McDonald Wright. It's interesting how so many of these seem to have certain characteristics in common. Color seems to be a real factor about Howald's eye, and also kind of their takes on nature and natural works. I mean, he's not buying that many, portraits or that kind of thing. There are a few, but mostly landscapes and still lifes that deal with, the artist's interpretation of the natural world. Now, I bring this one up. Oh, that was nice of her. She switched that. That's good. I had a small image of that. Anybody know Abraham Volkowitz? I wasn't really familiar with him, but he was a Stieglitz artist, part of that crowd with Dove and Hartley and Marin, and so he had studied in New York. He'd also gone to the Académie Julian in Paris to study, and he met Isadora Duncan at Rodin's studio in Paris, and pretty much became obsessed with Isadora Duncan. He did in his lifetime over 5,000 drawings of Isadora Duncan. All right, he thought she was like the embodiment of modernism. Okay, and he was a huge fan of Walt Whitman, and he saw her as like the embodiment of Singing the Body Electric. It was like Walt Whitman's poetry come to life. So he like I said, did thousands of drawings of Isadora Duncan. But he also painted, and this is a work from the Howald Collection, okay, called Bathers, a watercolor. Okay. So yeah, I just kind of picked out a couple that I weren't as familiar with. I wanted to throw in a couple other kind of works that are very interesting. This one's up. It's in the Folk Art Gallery. It's a small painting, but not a really well-known artist. And of course, a couple of Ohio artists. She did clean up. Oh, that October looks a lot better. And he bought at least like 3 Shilley works as well. What was the Columbus artist that Howald never bought? Bellows. Apparently, he didn't like Bellows' work. He never bought a Bellows work, even though the hometown boy. All right. He also supported artists. He supported Man Ray for trips to Europe, mainly through exchanges of works, for money. But great letter from Man Ray when he's talking about, you can go to the Daniel Gallery. I left some work there, and you can pick from what what I left with Daniel. And then down here where he said, I've made many new friends since I last wrote you, amongst them Picasso and Braque. And he's talking about he's becoming kind of the photographer of the moment. And he talks also about the fact that he's doing photography without a camera. Okay? But the support of Man Ray kind of ended when he switched more to photography, and Howald wasn't really interested in the photographic works. But he collected him before then. And then he paid for Rockwell Kent to spend a year in Alaska in 1918 and 1919. Okay? And this work hasn't been up for a while, but it's always one of my favorites. All right, so we've kind of worked our way through American. So the first work that he bought of a European artist, 1918, for this Léger. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Le Perforus, the punching machine, 1918. $28 plus $3 for the frame. All right, and then this one always is kind of interesting. He buys the Degas in 1921 at an auction, and I think in the United States, not in Europe, okay, for $1,350. And it's interesting, it's the only one, and I'm just wondering if he just thought he ought to have a Degas. I don't know, okay? He buys these two works in 1923 at Anderson's gallery, L'Apéritif, the appetizer, for $100. And this one, when I read about it, they described it as abstraction. And I asked Anastasia, is abstraction seated man with pipe? And she goes, yeah. Okay. So he bought seated man with pipe for $130 at the same auction, 1923. 1924, I don't have an idea when he bought Lorette, but this work, which was in the book as Still Life number 16, he bought in November of 24 for $3,500. The prices are going up. In March of 1926, this is the one we know from the book, $4,000 from the Rosenberg Gallery in 1926. This one, let me find my notes here, 1928 from the Valentine Gallery, $4,000 for this one. And in terms of at least contemporary works, this is the one he spent the most on. 1928, Tiger Hunt by Rousseau for $5,000. Once again, his collecting pretty well ended in 1929. I'm sure, I don't know if it was partly because of the crash, partly because his health wasn't the greatest. But let me tell you, Charles Daniel, the gallery only made it till 1932. And it got closed for non-payment of rent. And ultimately, works from the collection were purchased by other galleries. In 1942, the Needler Gallery, or Nadler, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, in New York, bought the collection. There was a testimonial dinner in 1943 for Charles Daniel by a lot of the artists that were in his group. Kuniyoshi was the master of ceremonies. In 1946, there was a sale of works from the collection at auction, and in the catalog, they said it was from the collection of the late Charles Daniel. He wasn't dead. He didn't die till 1971. Really kind of sad. All right? He was pretty well penniless for a lot of the rest of his life. He lived with a nephew. Like I said, he lived to age 92. And a critic in 1955 said he was that rare genius, a patron dealer who came to art only for the love of it. Well, what happens we'll switch gears a little bit here. In 1994, end of 93, 94, the Zabriskie Gallery in New York had an exhibition of Charles Daniel and the Daniel Gallery. Mrs. Zabriskie had met Charles Daniel in the early 60s when he'd come to the gallery with a Raphael Soyer, or Soyer, never know how to pronounce it, work to sell, okay? And he ended up coming, and that's how he was staying afloat pretty much, selling off little bits and pieces of the things that he still owned. And he would come back often and talk to her, and as she mentions in the foreword that he spoke often of his great patron, Ferdinand Howald, whose collection, now housed in Ohio at the Columbus Museum of Art, today remains one of the most important of its kind. And it talks about their relationship, and that they would go to dinner together, and that they had the immigrant thing in common, and mentions that he pretty well kept them afloat, and once his patronage ended, it really signaled the end of the gallery. But this book, which will be part of our collection, I got it on eBay, I think, or whatever, goes year by year of the gallery and all the artists. He ended up giving more than 200 artists exhibitions at the gallery, and gave at least 29 men and women their first solo shows. So he was definitely in it for the love of the art. It's interesting, and I'll talk about this, she mentions that in 1969, the collection was shown again here at the museum, and that's in fact when the collection book here was done, okay? And there's somebody sitting in this audience who was there for this opening. Who might that be? Betty Zimmer. Betty Zimmer told me that she remembered a room full of Marins during that show. But Virginia Zabriskie, and I have the New York Times review of that show here at the museum, never mentioned Charles Daniel. And she contacted the reviewer and said, "What's the deal? You should have mentioned Charles Daniel." And he said, "You're not the first person that's told me that that's something I should have done." So like I said, a great relationship between dealer and collector. All right, I wanted to show you some other European works. The Volmank is up, I think, upstairs. A couple artists that aren't as well known that he collected, Mauni and Passin. And you don't need to remember all these because they're all on, and of course the Diego Rivera Cubist work, and an artist that, once again, I wasn't all that familiar with, Valmier. But we have them, they belong to us. Well, the Rivera's been up, of course, yeah. But this one, I don't know. All right, so I've Xeroxed, and you'll all get them. I don't know where they went. They're down there. Okay. This magazine was in the showcase for the Picasso, and I didn't even realize it until after the fact because I found it online and was able to get a copy of it at the OSU library. But it was the only review of the collection while it was still a collection, before it came to the museum in 1925. And there's several really great quotes. The article spends a lot of time actually talking about what makes a great collection, why some collections are better than others, that if they reflect the personality of the collector. But he had lots of great words to say about the Howald Collection. He said, in addition, the Ferdinand Howald Collection has a warm and friendly personality, quite aside from what each individual who examines it may think of its component parts, because it was assembled with enjoyment. To appreciate the quality of the Howald Collection, it will help us if we understand the motives that have brought it into existence. They are quite simple, for Mr. Howald, I am sure, has been moved mainly by the pleasure and adventure to be derived from acquiring the works of art which most vividly represent the creative efforts of our own day. And what was also very interesting when I saw the article at the library was, if I can get it to work, this. This was a page in the same magazine. The Daniel Gallery had moved to 600 Madison Avenue by 1925. Look at the lists of the artists that he represents. Every single one of those names is in the Howald Collection. So I thought that was really interesting that it was there. All right, so Anastasia gave me a copy of the letter that the director of the museum at the time they were considering building the new building had written to Edmund Kean in 1963 describing his interactions with Mr. Howald. And he said in the letter to Edmund Kean, "Your most valuable possessions at this time in the permanent collection are, of course, the Howald Collection. When I was at the gallery, I was told that there was a collection of very undesirable paintings in the city when I inquired, but it was not worth bothering about. He was a very unpleasant bachelor and unapproachable." Okay? So, of course, that piqued his interest, and he found out that, that Howald had been a member of Phi Gamma Delta. And apparently Mr. Hecking was a Phi Gamma Delta. So he figured, hey, at least you have that in common. So he writes Howald and he calls him, but with no real success. So he decides he's just going to go out to the house and knock on the door. And he does that. He takes a taxi, and he said he was welcomed in. Howald apologized because his sister was ill. And he said, "Come in and sit down." And he sat me down in a room full of Arthur B. Davies. In the hallway were 5 or 6 Prendergasts. Boy, I hit pay dirt. He entered and offered me a cigar. I told him I did not know he had one of the finest collections of American contemporary art in the country. He was very modest about his collection in Columbus, yet he added, "I have twice as many more in my New York apartment." And he goes, "Lordy, he had Ryders, Demas, Birchfields. They were all very good men and many examples." And then he goes, wait, and he took him into his office and showed him more Prendergasts. And he said he wanted to see a real art museum in Columbus, but no one seemed to be doing anything about it. So he told him about this dinner he'd had at the Deschler Hotel with 8 prominent men of the city, and they underwrote $245,000 that night, and plan was to raise $500,000 privately and then go to the public. Howald says to them, "When you reach 400,000 privately subscribed, I'll make it 500,000." And he's like, "What? You'll do that?" He says, "How soon could this be?" He goes, "As needed for the building." So Hecking runs down and talks to Franz Huntington, which I'm assuming was Huntington Bank, and Franz is like, "Are you kidding? Did you get it in writing? Really? You need to get it in writing. I mean, he could die tonight or something. You need to get it in writing." So he runs into Howald like a day or so later. They end up meeting in the Sessions gallery, like outside, and hammer out a deal for the $100,000. And basically, Howald said to Hecking that he was the first person in Columbus who had ever said a good word for his collection. So I bought that postcard on the left on eBay, and Anastasia gave me this photograph, which she said probably hadn't been seen by very many people, but you notice what's missing from the front of the museum? No frieze. So these are both old. I wanted close to 1931 photographs, and as far as I know, these would be fairly close to 1931. All right, well, let me back up. Okay, so I want to talk, the collection, of course, comes here in 1931, and I read in the Columbus Today a little blip about the new museum, and it says, "The Ferdinand Howald Collection. This collection of paintings has long been recognized in Eastern art circles as one of the most comprehensive collections of modern art in America." And in fact, Gertrude Stein said the very same thing when she came to America and saw the collection. "In it will be found the great names of Matisse, Picasso, Drouin, Man Ray, Rockwell Kent, George Lukes, Ernest Lawson, John Sloan, John Marin, and Arthur B. Davies, and many others of importance." Now this is the telling paragraph. "These paintings may be hard to understand. The public on the whole may not like them. Neither do we understand nor like all modern music. We must admit that they do wake us from our comatose observance of realistic copies of nature and force us to wonder what they are all about. We realize that in the 5 Howald galleries, there is an ample opportunity for the study of modern trends in painting. So I liked how they're prefacing all that with, like, you may not like some of these works. All right, so the collection is reviewed in the New York Times in 1931. All right, and interestingly, I love the beginning. It says, "There's little doubt that last January, the association of Ferdinand Howald's name with the opening of a new gallery in Columbus had less significance for his fellow citizens than for New Yorkers. In New York, Mr. Howell's discrimination and venturesomely individual, tastes were well known at any rate among the dealers, the artists, and the auction-going public." So he's saying at this point, it reflects more on New York than Columbus. To them, it meant the assurance of a new live picture center in the Middle West. I like that, Middle West. Today, Columbus can be said to possess the finest civic collection of vital work by contemporary Americans to be seen anywhere in the country. But then I thought it was kind of interesting. Betty had told me about the room full of Marins. At one point, the critic says, "In fact, it is probable that the impressionistic, fluffy nicety of these," and he's talking about the Marin watercolors, "demands the reclusion of the private room they have been accorded, if only to shelter them from just such a confrontation with the plastic honesty of a Demuth or a Greece." So he didn't like the Marins so much. So, the proverbial gift that keeps on giving, okay? Not only do we get a collection of about 280 works from the Howald family, and that wasn't, of course, everything he had, but it was a goodly number, okay? He gave us money, all right? Not only to build the museum, but also to acquire more American works. And I just thought I'd show you a few things that have come from that. And if you see Howald Fund next to the, on the label copy, you know that's where it came from. So we have our wonderful Winslow Homer, Edward Hopper, and George Bellows. Not just snow dumpers, though. Also, these 2 works as well. And this one I threw in there because it was up for a while in the contemporary wing, and it was an artist I wasn't that familiar with. So I wanted, but also a Howald Fund. And then this one as well from the Howald Fund. All right. And over time, as art museums are wont to do, okay, some of the works from the gift were deaccessioned. Now, I don't think very many, but some. And that deaccession fund, Howald II, got us John Sloan, the Paul Manship, and the Tooker. And another Manigault, kind of to complete that circle. All right, so I'm going to throw you out a number, which I think will astonish you. Oh, and by the way, there were other things in the collection too. Mr. Howald liked ceramics. He bought a lot of ceramics. He liked to use them to decorate his homes. So a lot of ceramics came. In 1926, he also paid the largest price he ever paid for a work, a old master work, $5,200 for and I'm going to screw the pronunciation, Bartholomeus Brune. I don't know what the work is. I couldn't find it. I don't know if we still own it. I don't know. Okay, but he paid $5,200 for it in 1926. Great. Perfect. Perfect. I show you this one. Howald and Stieglitz didn't get along particularly, okay? I don't think Howald really bought things from Stieglitz. Stieglitz ran his gallery with the iron fist. I mean, he wouldn't sell to somebody he didn't think deserved it. I mean, he didn't really care about selling. He decried the commercialism of it. He didn't like any of that. And Howald was not a person that could be told, you know, what to buy and who he should buy and whatever. He bought a lot of the artists that had been part of Stieglitz's group, particularly John Marin and Marsden Hartley and Arthur Dove, and he bought those, but later, okay, mostly from Charles Daniel. But at one point, Howald, I saw this quote. In a letter, a female artist said Howald was quintessentially American. Howald replied, "No, I'm Swiss. I'm European." He later sent back some of the work that he'd been considering, and she said she was glad he didn't want it, that she didn't want him to have it. Guess who that was? As far as I know, it was George O'Keeffe. So I think it's ironic that the Howald Fund II bought our only George O'Keeffe work here. Now, like I said, I'm going to tell you a number which I think will floor you because it floored me. When I was talking with Elizabeth Hopkin from the museum, and I want to thank her, and I already thank Sarah and Anastasia and Megan particularly, and her intern Sarah Isaacs, and of course the indomitable Betty Zimmer, okay, who helped me a lot with this. But she told me this number. She said that because I wanted copies of everything that we currently had in the gift, everything that was bought under Howald I, and everything that was bought under Howald II. And I have those lists. They'll be part of my notebook, Julie. See, I got my notebook. They'll be in there, okay? She said the Howald name was associated with 875 works in the collection, which is amazing. I mean, considering it started with a gift of 280 works. And as a little precursor to Carol's trip, the end, this is the Howald Mausoleum in Greenlawn at that location. It's hard to find because it doesn't face the road. You can't see the name. And it was interesting, you can't go in, I couldn't go in, but I was peeking through the little panes of glass in the doorway, which you can kind of see there on I took these photographs, so. And I could see Ferdinand's name. I'm pretty sure I could see at least one of the brothers, and I could see Flora, his niece's name. But it was weird. There was a little bench on the opposite wall from the door, and there were two what looked like old football helmets sitting there. And I'm like, I have no clue what that relates to. Like I said, it's an extended family. There could be, I can't read all the names, there could be several people. It's a big mausoleum, as you can see. There could be several of the family members. All the family members could be there. His dad passed away when he was in college. His mother died subsequent to that. And his sister Rosa ran the household pretty much at 78 Park Drive and before that. And so she may be in there too. I just couldn't read all the names. But I just thought that was very interesting that there were, and I don't know if that's the highest state or whatever, but all right, I finished on time, I think. Like I said, I'm going to be adding this book to the Docent collection, the book about the Daniel exhibition at the Zabriskie Gallery, and I also found another book, Ferdinand Howald Avant-Garde Collector, online as well. So all those will be part of the library. And I actually put the picture I got of the museum, I put it in a little frame and I put it on the desk in the docent room, so to keep that. Thank you very much. like I said,